Okay. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this special peer-to-peer seminar presented to you by the Arts Centre Melbourne. My name is Meg Upton, and I'm going to be facilitating this session this afternoon. And this is very much about our performers and about those present, and also for those who might be watching after, because we are recording this event. I'd like to begin though by acknowledging country. And I'd like to acknowledge country in the following way. So we acknowledge all First Nations people of the land, and we celebrate and we honour their enduring connection to country, their enduring connection to knowledge and to the stories that they tell. We pay our respects to all elders, past, present, future, as we actively work for a shared future and a reconciled future. Today, I'm zooming into you from Bunurong country, and I live near the Dirimitwillan gathering place, which is an important place for the local people where I live. So, I'm a drama educator, I'm a teaching artist, and I'm an academic. So I bring those experiences to this session. In a minute, I'll introduce our performers. A little bit of housekeeping from Katie Warner, who's here, but she's in the background and she's asked me to deputise. So if people could keep their cameras off and stay on mute, and then they can watch what's going to happen today on Speaker View. And there will be not only discussion today, but we have got a couple of mini presentations that we've asked our performers to do, which you will see a bit later on. So why we're here is because our three performers, who I'd like to introduce now. So they could give us a wave as they say their name. So we have Michaela Franks, Tulipa Rodriguez Quinn, and Jakob Schuster. And I really, really hope I got your names right, but you feel free to correct me if I haven't. Now, each of our performers were fortunate enough to be invited to perform their VCE drama solo from 2020 in the recent top class concerts, which are run by the VCAA, and this year were live and were at the Arts Centre Melbourne. And that means that each of our performers today have scored very highly in the work they've done. And they're kind of, you're where they were last year, where they were just kind of getting to the point where they were going to choose a solo to do. And so with a year on, or even a little less than that, and plus with their examination behind them, with the process behind them, and then the performance at the Arts Centre Melbourne for top class, they're really well placed to be able to talk about their process today. So I also think this is a great opportunity for you to think about where you might go with your solo this year. And I know you might have your head very firmly in ensemble at the moment, but if you're watching this from the future, then you probably will have already chosen a solo. Okay, we need to keep to time today, so I'm going to stop talking. So I've introduced each of our performers by name, but now let's start off now by inviting let's ask Jakob if he would like to present a tiny bit of his solo. His solo was The Drifter, and you don't need to know a lot about it, but let's just watch and take in as much as we possibly can. So over to you, Jakob.
Hello, I'm up here in my attic and I'm going to do a minute of my solo now.
Welcome, amigos, to the Mojave Desert. Beware, I am inhospitable. But there is a man who roams these dunes, a man with no name. Quiet town, must be trouble afoot. Trouble? You're dang right there's trouble. Rattlesnake Red is hiding in my mine shaft. I've heard of him, and I'll do it. See, you're no lawman, but you're no outlaw neither. So who are you? You lousy drifter. We're all drifters in the Mojave, Red. Just one difference between you and me, though. I'm quicker on the draw.
Thank you, Jakob. Fantastic. And I love that you set yourself up in an attic, and then we saw that moment. Thanks for really enjoyable. For those who are watching from wherever you're watching from, and those from the future, just making a little note about what you saw in there in terms of different characters, the use of dramatic elements and conventions, the use of production areas. Okay. One of our other performers has also offered to present a little bit of their work today too, to help set the scene. And so Talipa is going to present a little bit from her chosen solo from last year, which was Frida Kahlo, who was an artist. So when you're ready, Talipa, take it away.
Revolución! ¡Viva México! Aguacates bien ricos. Flores para los muertos. Quick, Alex, in here before he finds us. Hi, is that painter Diego Rivera? Oye, panzón!
Who are you, mijito? My name is Frida Kahlo. I used to tease you all the time when I studied at La Prepa. I want you to look at some of my paintings. What do you think, Diego? Te quiero más que mi vida llorona. ¿Qué más quieres? ¿Quieres más? If I loved you, it was for your hair. Now that it is gone, I love you no longer.
Thank you so much, Talipa, for that. Okay, again, those at home, those from the future, if you can just take note of the beautiful work that we're seeing and putting it into a context around the dramatic elements, the conventions, the style, transformation, any production areas that you saw were present there. Okay, now we're going to start a discussion, and we've got some questions to run through. If you've got questions, if you're watching in this, we are asking you to pop those into the chat, and that can happen all throughout, but we'll probably maintain a main section at the end for questions. So here we go. Everyone ready? So I'm going to ask all our panel to put their microphones on so that they can participate. All right. Let's go back to April 2020 when the examination first came out. And I'm really interested to know how you chose the solo that you chose. So why Irina Sendler, why The Drifter, why Frida Kahlo? What were the processes that went on? And I'm going to begin with you, Talipa. Why did you choose Frida Kahlo?
Well, for me, it was a pretty easy choice because my heritage is South American, so it was kind of simple in terms of I knew I could use the language that was available to me. Like I could use the accent, and I had a kind of grounding in that sort of culture, which was really good for Frida Kahlo. But I think that also looking at her work and doing some kind of background research initially into who she was as a person and the kind of art she created really helped in kind of understanding her a bit more and working out whether I actually wanted to spend, months exploring her as a person. And I think that, that initial background research was really important for me in terms of choosing Frida over the other characters that were available. Yeah.
I'm going with some personal strengths or some personal interest. Great. What about you, Michaela? How did you choose Irina Sendler?
I kind of read through all of the solos and picked a couple that I thought were interesting and did research on. So I think I did like Irina Sendler and Frida Kahlo as my top two. And then the style of Brechtian theatre, which I am in love with, just in that it's it can be very political and so jarring, and I find it so fascinating. And then that combined with, I just was instantly so inspired by Irina Sendler. I thought her just this incredibly powerful woman who I'd never heard of. Those combined together really, really helps to convince me that was absolutely the right solo for me to choose. And it just all kind of culminated together to be the perfect way for me to show other people this incredible character that, you know, I didn't see as being talked about enough, especially now as we're talking more about like what happens in social culture with female rights and all that kind of stuff, and religion, and that kind of ongoing social battle between all of those things. I found it a really good way for me to convey what I wanted to say about it in a way that people would listen without tuning out like they might in a lecture or in a classroom setting. And I just fell in love with the character and the style, and it was perfect choice.
Wow, fantastic. And what about you, Jakob? Why the drifter?
Yeah, like, I mean, what Michaela said about like kind of making a short list, like they're all going to resonate with you a different amount. There were a couple other cool ones like the stage parent or like the boxer and all of that. There were some really interesting ones. The drifter, I found a few sort of interesting things in there, like the fact that the performance style was weirdly not like a theatrical style. It was spaghetti western, which is like a cinematic style, and like aspects like, for example, that the stimulus was actually a piece of music. I do lots of like music composition and all of that stuff. I love analyzing music, so I was like, great, like if the stimulus is a piece of music, I can make my whole thing around this sort of soundtrack. So definitely like playing to my strengths, and like it just seemed odd, and cowboys are fun.
Fantastic. So I think in the 3 points of view that we've heard there, you all seem to have some sort of personal connection that either came from an interest, or it came from a skill that you have, or came from a comparison. And but I think there's some really great advice there about going with your strengths. Sorry, there is something going on there. Okay, let's move on because I'm really conscious of time and we've got so many wonderful questions to ask. All right. So, Michaela, what was the way you started making your solo? What was the first thing that you did? So you've done your research, but how did you start making it?
Slowly. My teacher actually started us with thinking about the opening scene on its own, because it can be very overwhelming approaching it from the start. Like, oh, there's so many ideas, I don't know what to do. So she literally made the whole class think of something that was relevant that you could start with. And for me, it was the Cold War. And she said, okay, now think about what sounds would be in that environment. Make a sound that portrays, that would be seen in that environment. And then it was, okay, what movements would be happening? You know, would there be birds moving? Or for me, like there was guns, explosions, there was military officers and like line orders. And we started with just a very simply improvising something that's relevant for that environment to set the context at the very start of the solo.
Great, thanks. Did either Taliba or Jakob, did either of you start differently, or like Michaela, did you start kind of in your body on the floor, start playing with the elements?
Yeah, I definitely started more physically, I think, as well. Yeah. Especially because I knew that I had to include dramatic metaphor as something that was in my piece, and I knew that I wanted to make that something that was quite physically represented rather than represented in dialogue and that sort of thing. And especially because a lot of my piece needed to be referred back to paintings that Frida Kahlo did. And it was mainly kind of working out physical, like copying the way that she would stand in paintings, or copying like the way she would paint other people and that sort of thing, to kind of get a sense more of how I wanted to portray the characters. I think that was kind of useful as a basis of understanding.
Yeah. And so you both, and Jakob too, would recommend that after you've done your research, getting on the floor is a really great way to start the work, and not continually sitting down. And there has to be a point when you get up.
It gets to a point where you spend so much time doing research that it becomes ineffective, and you just, like, you know so much about the character, but you have no solo to show it. And it just kind of helps with getting you out of your comfort zone and really trying to work out physically who the character is and what the environment is.
Great. Jakob, I'm going to move to a different question for you. So in this process of making a solo and playing with playmaking techniques and, you know, improvising, however your physical process was and your thinking process was, did you find a way to record that process? And I know, can I just say too, we know that last year was a COVID year and that you were working with the digital medium all the time, but what was a good process for you in terms of recording it?
Yeah. I mean, COVID was interesting because it threw a real like spanner in the works. Of course, we're all like theatre people, so we're all, you know, it's like a live art form, so it's really strange to do it that way. But there was actually, I guess, like on that, we all kind of lost a bit of motivation. There was a period where our drama teacher asked for like 1 new minute of content filmed every week. And so I would come up here because when I was in my room, I was like, this is my room. I feel like, I don't know, I couldn't really be creative as like, and work on the solo. So I kind of cleared some room up here and just sort of, just forcing us to get that new content out every week. And watching it, like filming it and watching it back, you notice all of like the physicalizations when you're like, oh, that's still me standing there. Like, how do I need to change like the sort of emphasis and the, you know, what part I'm leading with and all of these like aspects of it that, you can't really notice when you're just doing it, but filming it and watching it back and always pushing forward, even when you feel like no motivation, whether it's because of COVID or whether it's just because your head's elsewhere and you're busy with maths. Keeping the motivation and keeping recording more content was really good.
Great. Would anyone else like to comment on how they recorded? Was there a different way from that, or did you
we kind of did the same thing, and our teacher was very much like very supportive of us, and I'm sure the other two will kind of agree. The drama teachers all round seemed to have been very understanding, yet pushing us forward. Like Jakob said, that it was kind of like a minute a week, that's all we're asking. And even if that minute feels like the worst minute that you have ever performed, it's something that you can actually work on, and it gives you something to do. Even if it's like 5 seconds where you go, hey, that was a great idea, that can go in the final thing. It helps a lot more than you'd anticipate. You're on mute, sorry, Meg.
Why do I always commit that sin? Okay, you're on mute. So it sounds like having a critical friend, be it your teacher, be it perhaps a colleague, but also you were your own critical friend, weren't you, in a few ways, by making those videos. Was that a bit weird for you, Talipa? What do you think? Did you do videos as well and look at yourself?
Yeah, I think it was a little bit strange, because a lot of the time you'd have like a 15-minute video and 3/4 of that would just be you standing there like trying to think of something to do. Like I would go through my like photo booth afterwards, and it would just be like 30 seconds of actual action and then just like 7 minutes of just like humming and standing there and like just talking to myself. So I think it was honestly quite entertaining more than but no, it was very, very useful to document things, especially because you didn't have the benefit of somebody else being in the classroom with you who might like remember what you did that one day that you showed them, or you know, like you had to remember yourself what you'd done. And I think that recording it was really useful for that, because you could record everything and not bother with stopping to write something down or stopping to like tell someone something. You could just record it all and then go back and go, okay, that's the bit that I was looking for that I wanted to include. So it was actually quite useful. It was really useful as well for moving from improvisation to scripting, because you could then look through all your improvisations and like, honestly, the first script that I did was just all of the dialogue that I said in my improvs just written out, even if it was complete garbage. It was just written out, and I had something to work with that was kind of like tangible and solid, and I knew I could connect it to actions that I'd already made up.
So it sounds like that recording is a really critical part, and you kind of do need to do that as part of process. But what you discovered in COVID is are there aspects of that if you were doing a solo now in a face-to-face that you would keep? Would you keep that kind of documentation, that digital documentation?
Yeah, 100%.
Okay. Great. So there's some kind of advice coming there that in the year that was, you found some really useful ways. But 30 seconds out of a few minutes is really cool. That's a lot of material, isn't it? Out of the 7 minutes that you've got, that's actually a lot of material. Let's move on now. So I want to kind of say the examination documents and the assessment criteria. Jakob, were they kind of, did you have them there all the time? When did you first look at them, and were they kind of on a friend to you on your way through making your solo?
Yeah, right. So the exam, so there's a few things. There's the exam rules, which is no open flames in the room, just don't bring fire in. Those you just stick to, just don't break those rules. That's fine, right? But then the criteria, which is there's 10 criteria and they're all out of 10. They can be a bit tricky. And so for those, a couple, for example, working in your convention and your element, get those in kind of early and make sure they're wrapped in well enough that the assessor will be yes, they definitely, used space or whatever your element is, For me, the most useful actually was the structure itself. Every word in there is an absolute gold mine. At the very start, I read the structure. That was actually how I started. Now I think about it, I read the structure. I highlighted every keyword and every adjective. You know what I mean? There's a drifter, but he's a mysterious drifter, right? How are you going to show that? Because it can be a real gotcha when you forget to show that, oh, it was a morning, but it was a foggy morning, and you didn't mention the fog. So that's super good to pull that apart and make sure the whole structure, you're approaching it on its own terms, and really revolving around that structure rather than just being I want to tell my story. This can just be the backdrop. Yeah. So crucial.
What about others, Julippa or Michaela? Yeah, did the examination documents feature really constantly in your process?
Yeah, they were pretty, I mean, honestly, I didn't use the actual rubric, I guess, document that much. I think that was more of a just at least for me, I'd in my younger years at school, I'd seen enough examples of work that I kind of knew what I was looking for. But definitely the structure by a mile, that was really, really, really important to look at, because there's just there's just so much to work with there, and you just can't afford to be only referring back to it every month. You need to be working directly with it, and I found it quite useful to pick one dot point and do improvs and stuff just on that one dot point, and so that you knew that when you got to putting everything together, you had material for all of them, especially with the third dot point that tends to be the weirder one. You need to be making sure that you have appropriate material for it that works with that dot point and also works with the stem. And I think the stem is something that a lot of people don't really remember is there until they go back and they're oh, I haven't actually included that, because it's one of the more annoying ones to work in, because it's usually a specific scene. It's usually something you actually have to display as a moment. And I think that honestly, one of the best things you can do is work out a way to weave that stem through everything else so that it seems more kind of natural, and you're not just saying, here's the stem at the start, now I'm just going to forget that is even a thing, because it's quite effective when you're watching it. And I found when I was watching other people's performances especially as well, that if you had the stem and then it came back through in different points in the performance, it was much more cohesive. And yeah, I think you definitely need to be referring back to that as you're working. Yeah,
so kind of like in a film where you've created your whole piece, and then you can put it down and perhaps edit it to kind of find the final cut, and remind the audience of the stem, and again and now here. Challenges about approaching it, Michaela. What were some of the challenges for you in making the solo?
I think overthinking it a lot. Like throughout the whole solo, you can become simultaneously your own best friend and your own worst enemy, because you want to do so well that you kind of lose sight of what actually you need to be doing. And I think the hardest part for me was letting go of that and like teaching myself that the solo is for me as well as my grade. Like everyone wants to get a good grade and wants to do well and goes towards ATAR, blah, 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 whatever. But in all the years that I've been able to speak to people that have gotten to top class, that have done really well on the solo, they've gone through the same thing. They've, aspired to be that, and that's great, but done so much better when they let it go and just focus on the solo and the enjoyment of the process and the solo itself. And like kind of acknowledging that it's a really incredibly beautiful thing that you can tell so much in such a short period of time. I think that was probably the hardest thing for me, like the getting started obviously, but then letting go of, I guess, my ego and all of that, and just letting the solo happen.
Oh God, it's wonderful. I think that's a really rich response, and I hope those who are listening and people from the future can kind of wrestle. You've got the tension of aspiration, and then the fact you've just got to get this done, and it is an examination, and you do have to meet the criteria, and you have to dot all the I's and cross all the T's and all that kind of thing. It sounds though that each of you had that in mind when you made a choice about your solo, though, that choosing the solo that enabled you to kind of live with it for quite some time is possibly a good way to go. What about other challenges? What were some of the challenges that you faced, Tulipa, in putting yours together? Are there any different ones?
A similar kind of area. I think that the motivation was definitely a massive thing, particularly when you're not in your drama class like we were last year. You're not when you're not with people, and this even goes for like when you're trying to do stuff outside of class, you're trying to do homework tasks and that sort of thing. It feels really strange, and it feels like it's just weird, and you're not doing what you should be doing, and it's not good enough. But I think that's something that a lot of times people kind of hit a wall with impro, because they want it to be perfect, and they want to have this like, I'm going to improvise 7 minutes and it's going to be my whole solo. But it's just not realistic. Like you have to kind of sit there and think, you're going to have to do like hours of improv to get like a few minutes that work. And it's a long process. And I think you got to cut yourself a little bit of slack, because I think that's probably one of the hardest things is watching yourself be horrible and thinking, oh, I can work with this. Like there's something there that I can still take from and I can still use. And I think that, you can't expect yourself to be perfect, and you can't expect the solo to be a perfect like piece of theater either, because it's oftentimes such a strange kind of structure, and the links you will make aren't exactly like what you're used to seeing on stage. And I think you got to make sure that you allow it to be weird, and you allow it to not exactly make sense, because a lot of the time it just won't. and there's no point trying to force it to make complete sense, considering that it's like a 7-minute performance of random things that all fit together.
A very large kind of random world. I think, Jakob, you mentioned the word weird when we had our conversation.
Yeah,
Talk about that.
definitely. I mean, that's the thing. That's like so much of this subject is about like being weird and being fine with that. There's something so like whether you're just rehearsing it on your own and feeling like you're completely mad just standing in a room shouting at yourself, or whether it's in front of a bunch of people and you're like changing character all the time. I think the thing that kills so many people's sort of vibe with it is that they just aren't like comfortable to just step outside themselves and like and just be really weird and just be completely okay with that, you know, versus, you know, like for example, I think drama versus, let's say, music performance is like music performance you need to be extremely, you know, dedicated and good at your instrument, and at drama that's absolutely true, but so much more of it is just like being ready to give it your all and just step completely into the world without, yeah. So I think you can get really far in drama just being weird and letting that sit.
Apparently your teacher would make you or ask you to do random performances around. Is that true?
Yeah, that's right. So that was with regards to like how like getting comfortable with performing in front of like all kinds of different crowds and in different spaces, because like, you know, we didn't know what the exam room was going to look like exactly, and so it was really good. You know, I would walk into a room with like, I don't know, some paperwork to like hand to him or whatever, and he'd be like, "Oh, I'm teaching a year 7 class. All right, year 7s, close your laptops. We're going to watch Jakob do his solo now." Or like to my maths teacher in the yard, and like the random sort of teachers that were walking around came to look. But basically what I'm saying is do your solo in front of just so many random groups of people in so many situations, because it means that no matter what they throw at you in the exam room, which will be probably a lot less scary than you think it will be. They will probably be lovely examiners actually, but whatever it may be, you will be comfortable with it.
Great advice. Let's go down to let's mine down into a couple of other things. I was listening to you talk about how you chose talking about choosing your convention and choosing your element, and that's not a question that we've kind of put on the list yet, but I just suddenly thought, how do you choose a convention and an element that you feel fit within the world of your solo? Would anyone like to offer a response to that?
Yeah, I kind of feel like.
Thanks.
I definitely got told from the very start, stick with your strengths. Don't like pick some obscure thing randomly because you think it would be rad. I mean, like that's a great thing to do, but if you have a talent, play to it. Like if you can dance, dance. If you can sing, sing, you know, all of that kind of stuff. Like Jakob choosing music because he studies music. I did the same thing with my convention, and I chose use of song because I was studying VCE music, and that was an incredibly easy thing for me to implement, and also include things that are relevant for the style, like satire and metaphor and all that kind of stuff. And it really, it kind of let me join together the two things that I was so passionate about just through choosing my convention. And it made me enjoy my solo so much more as well.
And it sounds like you made sense. So you're really considering the style. You're considering your strengths. You're choosing a convention that fits in that style, and then you have a certain comfort level with that.
Yeah, definitely. If you know, in the same way that Tulipa, you were able to use your accent as well. You know, if it's gonna emphasize your style that's listed on the structure, and it's going to make you feel better about the solo, like what's stopping you from choosing the convention? And it's drama has that such broad capacity to literally let you choose anything under the sun that you can do. It's an amazing space to kind of put on show that as well.
Yeah. Anyone else? What about an element?
Go
on.
I think for any, I mean, for me, I did rhythm because that tied in with my music. but it also like ties back to those ideas of the stimulus being a piece of music and that piece of music being very rhythmic. It's like you can often plumb the depths of whether it's the stimulus or the structure itself to find, like, if you're like not really sure what you want to do for your element or your convention, you can probably plumb the depths of that and find something. Like an obvious example is, oh, the stage parent, that lends to song, right? Sure, easy. But maybe you could have done with the drifter space, because in the films there's a lot of sort of work with the settings and the sort of like expansiveness of the settings. So like basically, yeah, if you're stuck for it and if you can't find a way to be like, oh, like no element jumps out to me or whatever, then yeah, link it to something else you're doing, or just drill into that structure and find it in there.
Right. Production areas. What production areas did you choose, Talipa, to use?
Well, I have my chair, which
Are you able to show us your chair again? Is that possible?
I'll take you
Swing around. Thank you. That's very kind.
So this is my chair, and it was some random chair that we found on the side of the road that my mother decided would be interesting. She called me. She was like, "I've got a chair on the side of the road. I'm going to bring it home." And I was like, "Okay." And so I painted it, and I painted it with like things that were relevant to my my character and my solo. Like this is from one of her paintings. So is this one. So is I'll show you upside down, but show it. So is that one on the, you can like kind of see it on here. And so that was really useful for me in terms of creating a kind of element that I could manipulate and play with. And it also helped kind of establish the setting of it. I used like the colors of it and the imagery and things to establish her character a bit better and establish like her kind of sense of connection to country, which was a massive thing for Frida Kahlo. And yeah, it was a good way for me to kind of show her paintings, which was like a massive part of what my solo structure was. And other than that, I also used some costume elements that I don't have with me, but I had a jacket and a couple of prop things that were really useful for me in terms of transforming character. The jacket was just like so useful for creating different characters and particularly for playing a man as well, because I think that we underestimate what our body shape and type like looks like physically, in terms of like you can be standing a certain way, but if your body's built a certain way, you still look like you. Like if you're a woman standing still, you're not going to look like a man, like unless you need to actively like make a choice to change your body a certain way to convey a different character. And I think that if you're really struggling to convey like for example, I had to convey like Diego, her husband, is really big and fat, and me just standing there normally, I was really struggling to actually convey that properly. And using the jacket to kind of accentuate the decisions that I was making in terms of my body positioning, I think was really useful in actually effectively conveying that character. And it gives you something to kind of play with in terms of transforming quickly between characters that isn't just switching your facial expression and your voice. And that's
so complementing the expressive skills, or extending and enhancing. So making choices. And Yaka, we saw you had we saw that you had a mouth organ, or rather a harmonica, and a piece. Yes, great. What about you, Michaela? Is there one thing that you found really useful that was a production area?
Well, I used kind of three main production areas. I used soundtrack, prop, and costume.
Could you tell us a bit about your soundtrack, just as an example?
Yeah. So my soundtrack, I actually decided to do because of the experience I had with using it for theatre studies. the year before. So I set up my solo in a, how do I explain it? It was a bit natural for the style, kind of jumping back and forth in this radio style. So I had FM radio frequencies that would play, and I had an underlying static that went through the whole thing. I also had, in one particular part, just before my dot point 3, which was drawing a parallel between Irene Sendler and another humanitarian throughout history. I was talking about Harriet Tubman. So just before that, I had part of Ronald Reagan's speech, basically, which was saying there's like no one has been like more well cared for, like across all races, than the people of America, which I used to kind of create a hypocrisy in then showing, like, physically I had my hands over my mouth as if I was being like trapped, I guess, and then sang a song that was very much about Black American slavery. So it let me have little contrasting moments in there and push that political nature of my solo in just very, very small bits that kind of were put out there without being that I could stand there and kind of force the audience just to listen to that and listen to what was happening, rather than them always paying attention to what I was doing and what I was saying.
Great. So choosing production areas that help create the world, that enhance your expressive skills, can act symbolically, can be relate to the style that you've chosen, allow for transformation. All those things sound like they're all coming through. I'm going to have to move on though, because we could just keep chatting. So let's move on to the next question. I'm going to ask Jakob, are you okay to answer this? What was it like? What was it like in the examination room?
Yeah, sure.
So you get there. You got there. What happened?
I got there. I made it there. Yeah, I mean, like I sort of mentioned earlier, it's less mean and scary than you probably think it will be. Everyone goes in like dreading it. Some people, have like dreams about it and whatnot. That's all very common. But actually, the assessors they laugh at your jokes. They like everything is delivered to them. It's suddenly more personal, and you have like, I mean, sure, you perform it to audiences beforehand, and like I said, I'm really glad I did, and you should too. Definitely perform it to audiences, lots of them. But of course, yeah, it's so yeah. I mean, another thing was because of COVID, the chairs were separated where normally they'd be closer together, and that I believe it was because of COVID, and that just meant that we could do a lot of different staging decisions, and so really stage it with the exam room in mind, and with where those chairs are placed. Which lines are you going to deliver to whom? Like, what effect is that going to make? Like, there are bits where you might want to stage something completely to one person, and then stage another scene to like make some sort of like triptych, or like like really spatially divide the work. So the exam room is not that spooky, but make sure you design everything with that environment in mind and practice with those spaced out chairs.
So keeping in mind that you are always making it for an audience, but you're as the examination, you're making it for quite a specific audience too, as well. And you can endow them, can't you?
Yeah, absolutely. You can deliver bits to one person as a character. Like there's a bit where I, look at because there's a line in the structure which says the silent but terrified townsfolk, right? Of course, the assessors need to be silent. So there's a bit where I'm like, like, any of you like know where the sheriff is? And of course they can't say anything, and so they become the silent but terrified townsfolk. So there it's like you like proving the silent bit from the structure, but also endowing them with being the townsfolk to get that effect. So yeah, whenever you notice any opportunity to endow them like that, definitely go for it.
Great. And I think that ties into something that Tulip said earlier about the fact that the solo is kind of a really constructed thing. It's not what we might consider a usual performance. It's very much an examination performance. So if that's what it is, then how can you make that work for you? Tulip, your statement of intention, when did you write that? Was that a kind of, I wrote it at the beginning, or did I write it at the end? And
It's not really bad, but I wrote mine like the day before. Because I think like I wouldn't recommend doing that, but no, I think it was a bit of a last minute thing for me, because I'd done a solo the year before, and I knew that I knew that I could kind of do it quickly. I wouldn't recommend doing that, but I think that it was pretty easy in terms of putting it together for me, because I'd already kind of collected all the information, like all the kind of stuff that you had to put in there in terms of like, this was referenced to this was referenced to that, this is an explanation for this. All of that for me was kind of already documented. Like I already had that written down in places because of stuff that I'd done in research and stuff that I'd done in improvs and that sort of thing. So when I actually got to sitting down and writing it, it was pretty simple of just like put it in and like, add a little bit of context to it. I think for me though, it was quite, my statement of intention was quite different to what a lot of people's normally would be, because mine was quite based on paintings and on images that she'd painted. And so I put those paintings in, because there's no necessarily like, there's no rule saying you can't put images in the statement of intention. I think that kind of what's important to remember with the statement is that it's for the assessors. It's not like some like, oh, there needs to be word perfect. It's for the assessors to understand. So you need to write it and construct it in a way that is easy to understand. Like you need to be able to just give it to like somebody who has no idea what the hell your solo is about, and they get it. So for me, that was putting the images in. So I wasn't like describing this painting or expecting that they knew what it looked like he was the image. There you go. Or words that were in different languages. For me, I had quite a few of those. So I put them all in, because I was like, otherwise they're just not going to understand what I'm talking about. Yeah, so I think you definitely do need to construct it with the kind of understanding that it's just for the examiners to better understand your solo. It's not necessarily needs to be this beautiful piece of English writing. It just needs to be something that they can look at for like 30 seconds and understand everything about your solo before you begin.
And there's instructions on the sheet that the VCAA sent out that gives you guidance, and there's actually a structure for you to write to. And it sounds like for all of you, because you've done all the research, because you'd built the piece, that you'd made really strong choices and you documented it really well, that just drawing out those things, those particular choices that you had made in relation to that content were the things that were really important. But it's I suppose it's a bit like writing an introduction to an essay. You can sometimes do that at the end, can't you, after you've made the piece? What do you think, Michaela and Jakob?
I think it's important to keep in mind that much like your solo, your statement of intention is inevitably going to change if you try and do it from the start. Like, I don't think I was much better in writing it as you, Julie, but I think I maybe like a week and a half before started writing it, and on the day before it changed, because it's just your solo is constantly changing, especially if you do, as Jakob was saying, perform it to lots of people. You're gonna have so much feedback. And I was lucky enough to work with a past student who had done top class drama and theatre, and she came over and she was like, look, that needs to go. And so my statement of intention was constantly changing, and it literally wasn't until the day before that I had the final one and, was able to go, cool, let's put this in the bag, ready for tomorrow. Yeah.
Okay, but you made choices and you completed it as required, so that's really cool. What about you, Jakob?
Yeah, same. I don't know if I'm like drama teachers may hate me for this, but I mean, every single person I've ever met, not a single one wrote it before like a week in advance or like a week and a half in advance or whatever. Like, I think I wrote it like a week in advance, and then we lost the file and I had to rewrite it the night before, but that was fine because yeah, you really don't know what it's gonna need to say until like you're right there and you're like, this is the solo as it will be. And then yeah, all you really want to do in it, I guess, is just like, there were a couple of bits where I was like, I'm not sure if I've made this like clear enough. They could arguably like look at the song and be like, where's that? So I mentioned that in there. And then also bits where you're like, you know, I was like, well, they're not going to know I composed the soundtrack unless I say I did that. So I said I did that, and like just drawing attention to your strengths and dropping your research in there. And otherwise, it's no piece of literature. It's just a sort of thing to really help clear up and like augment and amplify the effect of that solo.
Exactly. Highlight aspects of your interpretation you would like to bring to the assessor's attention, and very particular choices around that. Great. So we've only got about 8 minutes left, and I do want to remind people out there, if you've got some specific questions that you'd like to ask our performers, please pop them in the chat. Did you folks have fun making your solo? Was it a really fun thing to do? I mean, thinking back, and you've mentioned challenges, but was it also fun?
It definitely had its ups and downs. I won't lie. There's some parts that are really hard and it's a really big struggle to get through. And I think anyone that tells you otherwise is trying to shield you from the reality of it. It's hard, but it's so rewarding and it's so much fun, especially when you get to the end and you're like, I just did that. I just spent so much time on this solo and produced a piece of art that I am so proud of. That it just kind of, the bad fades away a bit.
Great. What about you, Talitha?
Yeah, I think it's a bit of a love-hate relationship. I think sometimes you wake up and you're like, oh my God, I don't want to do this today. And other times you're really into it. And I think that you have to let yourself go with the flow of how much you want to do it. In some respects, like if you're just absolutely hating it and you do not want to do it that day, you need to cut yourself some slack, I think, sometimes, but then you also can't let that go on for a long amount of time. I think what's kind of important is if you're just drained and you can't do it for like a day, cut yourself some slack, but then the next day you need to get back and get on. And I think that something that people underestimate is the amount of time that you have to put in. Like I was easily probably doing an hour a day, like minimum in just general work by the time it was like a month out. And by the time you've got like a week left, like we were first off,
you were early in the examination period.
Early in the examination period. And so the last, because we only got back to school and could use the space for like 2 days before our exam, and so we were working probably, I don't know, maybe like 10 hours a day, like before the exam, because we had no time. And it's like, you have to be prepared to put in that amount of work, because you just have to, like, you have to get it into your body. And I think that's something that like, it becomes part of you, and you have to kind of let it change and let it be fluid and let yourself kind of be less harsh on yourself as you're kind of building it and as you're making it. But then as you get to like the crunch time of this needs to be happening, you have to just force yourself to do the work and to perfect it and to put the hours in, because otherwise it's just not gonna get there.
So make the choices. Sorry, Michaela, go on.
I was just going to say, I think giving yourself a break as well especially applies in year 12. Like year 12's hard enough as it is. If maths needs to take priority, then let it happen. And like Tulipa was saying, like, be kind on yourself as well. You know, you're the one that you have to live with the most.
And I guess ask for assistance too.
Totally.
Good advice. You know, who's around you who can assist you? Who's that critical friend? Who's your teacher? Etc. etc. Jakob, I wanted to ask you, one of the last questions that I want to ask is, you know, what are the benefits of studying drama for all of those students out there who are the new class of 2021? And then where you are and thinking back on that, what are the benefits of doing drama in this
Yeah, wow.
year?
I mean, it's like the others said, it's got its ups and downs, but it's definitely got its ups. It's definitely making a solo, and more generally, just making theatre. Like, I love drama so much, but it was often one of the classes. I would be like, I've got all my classes on, and I've got drama, and I'm like, oh, almost like a feeling of dread, but not. But the reason I sort of pinpointed it later, it's because all of the subjects are work. Maths is work. It's all labor, but drama is like emotional labor. It's one of those few subjects where the work is feeling things and portraying feelings and creating feelings in other people. It's a completely different world of work than all of your other VCE subjects. And one of the benefits of that is that when the maths is too much, when you've got a bunch of other like really academic subjects or whatever the hell you're doing on your plate, and you want to escape, you can escape. You have a place to escape to and still be productive in, and still get to, yeah, both express yourself and, escape your own character into another character. It's such a big task to put together a solo, but it's also a really fun task, and it's a task you can use to break up all of your other stuff and give your year 12 actually a bit more balance than if you just did, like, I don't know, a full set of like science subjects or something like that. You'd feel more, you'd probably feel more flat out. So even though drama can feel tiring because it's that whole different kind of work, it's that whole different kind of working and thinking, it's still so worthwhile, and the skills you learn are phenomenal. And the class definitely bonds more than other classes would, because you're all doing such an interesting and creative thing. And yeah, it's something that I would not have sacrificed for anything. It was yeah, just definitely one of the highlights of ECE for me.
So good to hear. We've got 2 minutes left. Are there any questions from the audience for our performers that you would like to pop into the chat? Thinking time.
While we're waiting, sorry, Meg, can I just add to what Jakob was saying?
Please do.
I think it's definitely one of those rare cases in your life where you're really forced to come to terms with and confront yourself as a person, as an individual, in like culture, in school, like in your own life, and sort of really step back and go, okay, this is who I am. And it helps you to learn to accept yourself for who you are, and gives you that opportunity to build so much self-confidence in it as well. I've just seen a message in the chat, so that's all I really wanted to say.
So there is a question from the audience. So thank you, from Kiara. Is there anything you would give to your younger self if you had to do it again? So any advice you would give to yourself if you had to do it again? I think that's the gist of that question.
I'd tell myself to trust the process and to be patient. It takes a long time, but it's worth it.
Tulipa?
I reckon you have to be really okay with letting things change at the early stages so that it doesn't have to change as much towards the end. I think that that's something that it took me a while to understand, because I was so like set on certain ideas at the beginning of the kind of improv stage and trialing stage. I was really set on, like, I want to include this is definitely going to be in there. And I think you've got to really just let yourself go with the flow. And if someone goes, hey, that's just horrible, you need to kind of sit there and be like, okay, you're probably right, like you're probably correct that shouldn't be in there. Because I think that yeah, you really just need to be okay with things that you thought were great changing, or something that you wanted to include not being there anymore, because you don't want to be making those changes last minute.
And you've only got 7 minutes to tell that story, haven't you? To create that story and show that story. Yeah. And so change is going to be inevitable, isn't it? What about you, Jakob? What would you tell your younger self?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. definitely getting in and planning early. Like the day those solo structures drop, start planning. Not because you have to, but because it's interesting, but also because you should. You really should. Get amongst it as quickly as possible. And for me personally, I would be like, look, you think it needs to be that long? You think all of your dialogue is great, but it's not. There's so much you can cut. Don't worry, it's fine. And yeah, just have fun, trust the process, like Tulipa said. And you don't need to include Sergio the Gravedigger. He's not a necessary character. That one's not vital.
Let yourself be vulnerable as well, I guess, like kind of summing up what both Jakob and Tulipa have said, you know, get comfortable with being uncomfortable, because the best solo is going to come out of that. You know, let yourself be open to constructive criticism, and don't, if you get defensive about it, you're not going anywhere. Like, let that feedback come in. Don't get offended if someone says that it's not great or they can't understand, especially if you're doing epic or Brechtian theatre. If someone says they don't understand, take it on board. Definitely.
And I know we're running a little bit over time, but just wanted to add to that because I think this is really important. Try and find someone to watch your solo who does not do drama and does not do theatre, because it is so useful, because they will sit there and be like, what the hell was that? And while a lot of the time they just won't understand and they won't like get that you have to include certain things, a lot of the time it's really useful, because a lot of the time they'll sit there and I'll be like, did you know this was the same person? And I'll be like, what? Like, that was meant to be the same person? And you were like, oh yeah, like you get things from them that you would never normally get from someone who does theatre or drama, like you, because they know what you're doing. And having someone there who has no idea what the hell is going on is really, really good for you to make sure that it's understandable and make sure that you're getting your ideas across. And I think that, yeah, having someone who doesn't know anything about drama and also having someone who's supportive, because a lot of the time you're going to be your biggest critic, and a lot of the time you want your teacher or something like that to be quite critical of you, because that's their job. It's good to have someone who will just be like, you're doing great, like you're doing so well, I have no idea what you're doing, but you're doing great. To have someone there who is just supportive of you, because you need to have a bit of balance, and you need to be told that like that thing looks really good though, to kind of have a bit of like, so it's not just like you need to change this needs to go, this needs, like you have to have a little bit of positive balance for you to actually not just hate your solo.
Sounds like really, really good advice. We're out of time. I'd like to say thank you, and I'd like to congratulate you all for the work that you've done, that has consequently you've been in top class and you've lived with it, you've had to relive it and reperform it, and that was a buzz, I bet, for you. But thank you. I think one of the gifts we can have in this kind of conversation is you speaking to the next generation of solo makers who will be venturing into this task, and I think your words are wise. And I thank you very much for your contribution today, and I'd like to thank the Arts Centre Melbourne for this opportunity. So thanks everybody, and thank you for coming. And if you're looking in viewing from the future, chukas for your solo for 2021, everyone. Thanks Tulipa, thanks Michaela, and thanks Jakob, and thanks Katie and the team at Arts Centre Melbourne. And thank you.